Delighted to be in Albuquerque. I was mentioning to Roger, we have a project in Albuquerque and one in Santa Fe, and I've enjoyed a lot of visits to this part of the country the last year and a half or 2 years. I am a complete architecture junkie, and I keep thinking that at some point it's going to wear thin, you know? How many thousands of buildings can you go see and not at some point begin to feel like it's repeating itself? But it doesn't happen. And if anything, I feel more just amazed by and intrigued by this discipline and what we do and the impact it has on the world more than ever in my life. I love to think about architecture. I love to read about architecture. I love to dream about architecture. I love to talk about architecture. I love to design architecture. I love the construction process, making architecture. I love to inhabit architecture. I love to watch other people inhabiting architecture. I'm a complete architecture junkie. And I will tell you that a long time ago, I moved from being a junkie to being a pusher. And I am now on a mission to get as many people hooked as I possibly can. I want to infect the world with this amazing discipline of architecture. And I have taught at University of Texas for about 35 of those 37 years. I have taught a class to the great unwashed, a large university class that is on architecture and society. And that is my great love. I love letting people, ordinary people, have a window into what this field is. Now, I'm a big fan of architecture with a capital A, those enormous, incredible monuments of architecture that make it famous. A place like Machu Picchu, where you can palpably feel this ancient culture. You can viscerally, in your gut, get an idea of the spirituality and the ethereal nature of these Inca people by being in this remote spot in the Andes where they built this incredible city and with a craft that is unbelievable and with this prowess and this commitment that's incredible. I love the experience of a place like Machu Picchu. The first time I went to the Taj Mahal, I was in my early 30s. And I was just blown away. You've seen a million pictures of this building, but it was astounding. The scale of this building, just the sheer size of that. And I had no idea it was that mammoth. And then all the way down to the tiniest detail, the beautiful intarsia inlaid semi-precious stones, the carving, the intimacy of the building, as well as its monumentality. It blew me away. This may be one of the very best buildings in the world. Then I went back to India about a year ago, trailing along some family members with me who had not been. And I was expecting to see something I'd already seen before. I knew how I'd experienced this before. I didn't expect any surprises. But I got there and was completely overwhelmed again. It's an amazing thing and just blows you away. So I love those great monuments. I also I have a kind of perverse affection for these bizarre things we make these days as major architectural statements. And I don't think they have quite the same qualities of those eternal monuments, but they're big and they're muscular and they're mesmerizing. And they kind of remind me of bodybuilders in the gym, you know, with these gigantic muscles. And you know that those are distorted and they're kind of freakish. And the truth is they're not very useful. Those guys can barely bend over to tie their shoes. But they're incredible. I mean, you just can't take your eyes off of them. And I feel like some of the buildings we do today that get a lot of attention are really good at that. They're great at getting a lot of attention. But I have a kind of love-hate thing, but I still go anywhere there's a new one. In January, was in Guangzhou in China and saw Zaha Hadid's Opera House. Piece of shit. No, I didn't say that. But you know, there's sometimes inspiring, there's sometimes really incredibly disappointing. But I'm hooked. I can't not go see one of these buildings. But if I draw back from just that love of the field in a broader sense, and I try to remember what's the most important to me, what I truly, dearly love about architecture, it really doesn't have so much to do with those buildings. What I love about architecture is the impact architecture has on everyday lives of ordinary people. This wonderful symbiosis of people and culture and place. This is a series of mountain villages that I went to with my son about a year ago in China. And there's no roads to these villages. They're in the mountains, and you have to hike into them. They have no wheeled vehicles because you really can't traverse this landscape with wheels. So you hike in, and everything is done manually. And these villages are absolutely stunning. Everything is so beautifully sympathetic with the landscape. And there is this amalgam of nature and mankind and economy and agriculture, and it's been that way for ages. It's an extremely sustainable way of living. And just seeing those beautiful places that accommodate this healthy and long-lived way of living on the land, to me, that's very beautiful architecture. And then at a more urban scale, the same kind of thing happens in this little town of Pingyao on the far western border of China, almost Mongolia, a city that was on the Silk Route. And you know, it's virtually unspoiled, but it's got a thriving life today. And it's the smallest little gestures in this town, the scale of their streetscape, which is really wonderful. Every street is lined by these steps, sometimes 2 or 3 steps, sometimes 4 or 5 steps. I've never seen a city with that kind of street section. And it's transformed the way people use the public space. Those steps become a kind of theater where activities occur that don't normally occur in villages or small cities of this sort. And they're used in such a variety of ways, sometimes as a way of introducing what now is a very entrepreneurial place. Their goods all being displayed on those steps, or sometimes it's a place for sort of storage of the bicycles, which are the primary means of transportation in the town. This sort of quieter residential street where these girls are studying after school in the afternoon. And you know, that ability to be there studying in their home and yet on the street where a public life is really enabled by just those few steps that make that differentiation between public and private. And what a different life that town has because of this modest intervention in the physical environment. I love vernacular building. I love places that just seem to have grown naturally out of their culture. This gentleman's home in India, where the thick mud brick walls are stabilizing the temperature, making a kind of cave-like coolness in this hot Indian climate. His bed just made out of the reeds, so every bit of air can circulate around him on those hot evenings when he's sleeping. The house is all built around a courtyard, and most of the house is open air, with just the few kind of most private spaces indoors. And the cooking and the life of the family is almost completely outdoors. There's just a sensibility to this. It works with the climate. They're using their local technology to make it. It's a beautiful intersection of life and architecture. And you can find this all over the world. What is it like to live in this serene little village, almost unspoiled, in rural China? This quiet, peaceful place. And what would it be like to be this little girl growing up in that town and experiencing that every day of your life? And it shapes you. It makes you who you are. How could we not be concerned about, mesmerized by this vehicle that is so essential to the shaping of the lives around it? And how different the life of that little girl is than 100 miles away in Shanghai, where they are reinventing their culture, a long-standing culture that just in the last 10, 15 years is completely transforming itself from communism to capitalism, and from everyone being very much under the thumb of an extremely oppressive government to having a taste of freedom and being able to be individuals and do what they want. And you can see the way that in order to become that kind of culture, they have to transform their physical environment. They have to make a new kind of place, because you can't be a new kind of culture in the old kind of physical environment that we're in. And that's why China's building like crazy, because they're transforming who they are, and architecture is a powerful vehicle for doing that. And you can walk down the streets in Shanghai, and it's palpable, this entrepreneurship, this capitalistic idea, and then they're expressing it in physical environment over and over. And in their more important buildings in this culture, they're also saying the same thing. It was so important in the case of the Olympics, this ambitious thing they were trying to do in China, that they find an architectural expression of our ambition. How can we show the world who we are and how we've progressed? And the way they do it is by making this amazing stadium and this extraordinary building. And it still stays there and becomes, this was just a kind of random night on a hot summer evening, tens of thousands of people in Beijing go down just to be in the presence of that building, just to remember the glory of China for those couple of weeks in the summer of 2008, when the world was focused on their accomplishment and their transformation. What held that memory, what keeps it there as a goal for them, is this amazing building. That's the kind of architecture I'm interested in. And it's an architecture that's authentic and genuine and grows out of very real parameters of the culture, of the place, of the climate, and makes this authentic representation of people and place. There are plenty of great architects these days that are doing this kind of building. Glen Merkett in Australia, this is a beautiful house he did way, way, way out in the middle of nowhere in the bush in Australia. And it's all about keeping the sun off of the volume of the inhabited volume here in a very, very hot climate. It's all about gathering the water on the roof, transferring it to tanks where it can be stored and used for domestic purposes. It's all about then also taking the water off the hillside, putting it in a tank here, filtering it, and having it available for sprinklering the whole building when there are bushfires, because there are commonly bushfires here, and it's a natural occurrence, and you don't want to fight it, you just want to live with it. A building that's made out of steel frame where no member is so big that two people can't move it in, and that it couldn't be put on a modest-sized truck to go on wretched little back roads to get to this remote site, and then be assembled like Tinker Toys into the building. A place where it's a very modest size house, maybe 1,000 square feet, just for a man and his wife. They're retired. This is pretty much their full-time home. But they wanted to be in a place where they were connected to the landscape. And the building puts you in the landscape, becomes a kind of natural extension of the natural environment in built form. beautifully attuned to the climate, beautifully attuned to the hillside that it rests on, delicately placed on the ground, sort of minimum impervious cover, just touching the ground lightly with those few piers, an exquisite representation of life in a place. I'm particularly interested in kind of ordinary buildings, not the freaking art museums or the concert halls or the monumental personal statements. I'm interested in the kind of building that's a workhorse, that's really doing its job exquisitely well. And I think that happens in this, what really is an industrial building, this winery in the Napa Valley in California, the Dominus Winery by Herzog and Demeron. I think these are famous architects, but at the same time, this is a real building. This is a workhorse building because they're making wine here, and this is not one of those wineries where the tourists come and they sit in a plush environment and taste the wine, and it's an ad campaign for. It's not that at all. You can't even go see this building. It's off limits. It's a private kind of thing because they're just making wine here. It's about making really exquisite wine. But it's so much a part of this site, this long valley that has a ridge of hills on either side and this very fertile flat land in the middle with a creek running through it. And the building parallels those hills and runs long and thin like the valley does. It also has long faces north and south and short faces east and west, ideal for that climate, but also parallel then to the vineyards, which also want the maximum sun on the face of those plants, and so they're running with their linear direction north-south. So the building is there, symbiotic with the hills, symbiotic with the vineyards, thermally exactly right in its orientation. It's made of the stones that you can pick up right there on the site, and they're collected into these gabions. Of course, when you do agricultural work, you pull all the stones out of the soil so you can till the soil. So the stones go into the building. They stay right there in the locale. But they make it the same sort of tawny color as the ground. The texture of them very sympathetic to the landscape beyond and the hills with the trees on the sides of them. There even is a kind of wonderful thing about these gabions where their wire cages seem just like the wire armature that holds the vines up, so that there's a dialogue between the agriculture and the building. And it's just an industrial building. It's raw, and it's rough, and it's plain, and it's perfect for where it is. A great deal of the workspace is actually outdoors. It's nicely shaded, beautifully ventilated. It's in a rather salubrious climate. You feel when you're working here like you're in the vineyards. Even though you're an office worker, you're working in the vineyards because they're right there present with you. When I was there, we had a little meeting in a conference table that's right in the outdoors right there, completely a part of that larger vineyard. And then there's the spaces where the tanks are and they're fermenting the wine, and there's spaces where they're kegs and they're storing the wine, and those have incredibly high thermal mass, thick concrete walls, the gabions on the outside of that, so that most of the work of keeping the temperature stable for that fermenting process is done by the building itself, just naturally, easily, because the building is about doing that job. And that's part of its exquisite elegance and straightforwardness as a piece of architecture. This is the kind of architecture I love. An everyday building, absolutely exquisitely designed to do exactly what it needs to do and make a stronger place and a better life for the people interacting with it. I think that's the same thing that happens at the thermal baths in Valls. Again, an iconic building, but not like those signature buildings, not like those pumped up muscle buildings, but a building that really is about economic development. The little town of Valls was falling apart. They had a ski slope, but all the big ski slopes with 43 different runs were putting them out of business because they were just a little ski run. And the town was withering on the vine, and they'd always been about tourism, but their tourism was leaving. And they got the idea of, well, we've got these thermal springs, hot springs, cold springs. Maybe we could make an attraction for tourists out of those springs. But it would have to be something spectacular with those springs, a way of feeling those springs in an intense way, more intense than a normal hot bath would be. So Peter Zumthor is really about taking a natural resource and enhancing it authentically to make something that draws people to this little town of Valls. And the thermal baths do that exquisitely. They take the local stone, which is in all the little buildings around there, this horizontal flat stone, laid up in layers, and he makes a slightly different layering of the stone, but recognizably still very much a part of its place. He buries the building in the side of the hill, lets it become like a cave reaching down and grabbing the water and pulling it out for this experience, so that you see the ground plane going onto the building and the sod roofs, and you see the building tumbling down the hill. And then as you go into that cave where he's mining that water and bringing it out, you feel like you're in the middle of the earth. You feel the wetness and the coolness, and you feel the dimness and that precious little bit of light that comes in and highlights everything else. You feel the moistness because the light catches every bit of that vapor and makes it almost touchable and palpable. He's taking this natural resource and just heightening it so that we feel it in a more intense way. Not a kind of artificial thing he's bringing to the problem, but really understanding the problem so deeply and expressing it in architectural form. Those baths are amazing, sensuous experiences. And then at a certain point, you come to the light, you come to the exterior, you come to the view. The Alps are out there, the south sun comes in these big windows. You warm your body in the warmth of that sun. Just an exquisite essay on that experience of these baths, the hot and cold water, our skin, our bodies, everything heightened to a beautiful extent. Now, this is really dangerous to show one's own work after those exquisite buildings. But I want to make the point, this is freaking what I'm trying to do. This is what I want to do. I want to make architecture that's about everyday life, that enhances millions of people's lives, that really has an impact, makes a difference, contributes something to the world. Not a kind of pumped up ego statement, but something that really just sits there and does its job beautifully. I think one of the most important experiences we have of architecture is our subliminal experience of architecture. When we're not looking at it, when we're not paying attention to it, but it is powerfully shaping our lives. This would be a completely different experience between you and me if the rake of the auditorium were 20% less. It would be a completely different experience in this hall if the size of those slides was half the size it is, because that's all the wall was at the front. It would be a completely different experience if the room were twice as deep and half as wide with the same number of seats. These details of design shape our experience of everyday life, and we're not thinking about it. We're unconscious, but it's making a huge difference. That's, I think, where the rubber hits the road in architecture, where it really affects people's lives. We had the opportunity a decade ago to do the airport for my hometown, Austin. And damn, scary, scary job, scary, because everybody goes to the airport. And if you screw it up, then you got to move. You just can't live in a town where you did the airport and everybody hates the airport. So big pressure. So this was 5 years of my life, and sort of building this thing out in secret somewhere, and nervous as hell that, would it work? And yet exciting, really exciting to think of building this facility that is the gateway to your city, that people come and go all the time via this airport. And it opened in 1998. And thankfully, it has been immensely popular. People love this airport. And in fact, there is, in the aviation industry, they have an organization that tests user satisfaction of airports all over the world. And every year they come out with their ratings of different airports. And for the last 10 years, the Austin airport has ranked either number 1 or number 2 in the United States in this user satisfaction. Now, you know, it's gotten some AIA awards. It's, you know, it's been published in the big magazines. That was okay. In my book, that's what I want. I want people to say, I love this place. This is cool. I hate most airports, but I love this place. It works for me, and I really enjoy it. And it does create in our city, I think, a sense of community that other cities don't have, because there really is a kind of life in that airport. People tell me all the time, when I come home to Austin, I feel like I'm home the minute I walk off the plane. That airport just feels like Austin, feels like home to me. I have a friend who, he teaches at University of Texas at Austin. His wife teaches at SMU. They commute back and forth one way or the other every single weekend of their lives. And he said, this is the most important place for me in my life, because I'm always going through that airport, and it's wonderful and it's comfortable and it makes my life better. And it would be so wretched. I mean, the other end, I'm at Love Field, and I hate it, and it's miserable. And this, I think, is the kind of difference, whether we're thinking about that or not, that what we do makes in people's lives. So this airport was all about a kind of interaction that I think has worked out exactly as we planned. This big room where all of the food and the kind of outdoor, almost feeling like you're outdoors environment, where there's a kind of cafe society. I don't ever go to the airport. Even when I was there today, ran into a friend. We had a 10-minute conversation. I was a little late for my plane, but that was good. I needed to talk with them. But it's a place where you do run into people, because the paths are orchestrated in such a way that, you know, people see each other. And there are these interesting little pylons right here that have exhibit spaces in them. And they do a wonderful job of managing that. And those exhibit spaces are all about exposing people in the community to other things happening there. Right now, it's like the woodworkers of Austin. And who knew there were woodworkers of Austin? But all these guys showing all this woodcraft in Austin. A while back, it was church hats of African-American ladies in East Austin. But just little bits of our community that have an outlet, have a place to express themselves, which if the architects didn't put that in there, it doesn't happen. Dozens and dozens of decisions like that that actually have made this airport friendly, convenient, pleasant, lots of natural light, a sense of being a place where you take off to the sky. None of that nasty sort of baggage claim area where you're in a basement, and that's where you spend a fair amount of time. And that's where you're greeting your relatives or your lover, and you know, it should be a wonderful celebratory space, and it is. So I love doing that airport. That is the epitome of the kind of building I want to be involved in, is one where it's affecting everyday life. It's a place where people move and work all the time. A similar project that I think has that same public quality to it is a park that we recently completed in Houston. This is right in the middle of downtown Houston, 12.5-acre park. It was an amazing opportunity. Downtown Houston is not a great downtown, and they're struggling and they're trying to make this a better place. And one of the things it does not have is any substantial open space or public space for people to gather. And this was on an edge of downtown Houston that's really struggled. The convention center, we're standing on the convention center in this photo. The big arena is over here. The ballpark is over here. They'd invested millions of dollars in these big facilities, but there was no fabric of the city to pull them together. And with Hargrave's landscape architects in San Francisco. We did this project several years ago as a means of trying to encourage economic development in this part of downtown, as a means of trying to give a living room for the city where people could come and celebrate being Houstonians, and actually trying also to enhance the attendance at the convention center, at the arena, at the ballpark, to make a place you could come and do more than just park your car and walk in a building. And Discovery Green has been remarkably successful as well. This one, in 2010, we won the World Architecture News Effectiveness Award, one award given in the whole world. And this was a really unusual design jury, where what they're asking for is you have to prove the effectiveness of your project. It's not glamour shots with just jazzy photography. They really want to know what difference did this building make. This is just my kind of design awards program. And we could tell them that the convention center in the year before Discovery Green had X amount of revenue. And in the year after Discovery Green, that revenue was increased by 19%. Their bookings went up by 19%. And they say the only explanation for that is we were in a rotten part of town and it was dismal to be here. And then we were in a beautiful part of town and it was wonderful to be here. And our bookings went up by 19%. The attendance in this park has been way beyond anybody's expectations. Who thought in that wretched, hot, humid climate of Houston, people would just hang out outdoors? I had a student in my big lecture class come in the other day and he said, "Oh my God, I just realized you did Discovery Green. I lived at Discovery Green all the way through high school. We played rugby at Discovery Green. We went to musical concerts at Discovery Green. In the wintertime, we ice skated on the pond at Discovery Green. That's my favorite place." And that's just what we were trying to do, to make a place that Houstonians would say, you know, we do have a public life. We have a place we can go and come together. One of the coolest moments I've had at Discovery Green was maybe a year and a half after it was open. I was there, and there's a really great restaurant right here called The Grove, but it's a pretty pricey restaurant. There's a much less pricey cafe over here. But I'm around this area, and there's a couple sitting out on the terrace there having a drink, and they're obviously well-heeled River Oaks, shishi part of town kind of folks. And they've got a couple of kids, and they're sitting on the terrace having their drinks, and the kids are out playing around under the trees here. And when I'd parked my car back over here, I had noticed this Hispanic family also parking their car by the meter, cheap like me, not underground where you pay $10, and I'm sure these people had parked underground. But so they lift the trunk of their car and they take out their cooler, and they move their cooler down and park it under one of these trees and put out their blanket, and they got 5 or 6 kids, and they're, you know, spreading out the food of their cooler, and they're having a great time over here. This is clearly a very low-income family, and this is clearly a very rich family. And pretty soon the kids start kind of gravitating toward each other. And pretty soon they're playing and having a great time. All these little Hispanic kids from the barrio and these shishi kids from River Oaks, and they're having a great time. This does not happen in Houston, Texas. This does not happen in most American cities. We don't actually come together across demographic and socioeconomic lines. But in a public space like this, it happens. And it doesn't happen without the architecture reinforcing that kind of, you know, you've got to put places that'll attract this kind of person and places that'll attract that kind of person, and then make it feel comfortable for people to interact with each other. This is the power of the medium that we work in. So besides that, it's just a cool and rather beautiful park. For some reason, let's try it. That's that restaurant called The Grove. There were these beautiful live oak trees, and we just kind of went with the flow of live oak trees, so the kind of linearity of that alley gets reinforced by the linearity of the restaurant. It's a north face, so we could just open up with tons and tons of glass. And on the upper floor, it actually is a room that the glass all slides away and it becomes just interactive with the treetops. And they actually call this the tree house part of the restaurant. And you're able to just be in this park and in this green space right in the center of downtown Houston. And the kind of wood and the warmth, and this has cross ventilation. For most of the time, they don't air condition, they don't condition it at all. And yet it's, even in Houston's wretched climate, it's very temperate there all year round, always a really beautiful breeze. So those are public spaces, but let me talk a little bit about more private spaces and the impact design has on everyday life in maybe the most intimate place where it has that impact is in residential environments. And this is actually a building we did in downtown Austin now about 8 years ago. And it's called Austin City Lofts. It was one of the first high-rise buildings in downtown Austin. It was a pioneer. And since then, at this point, there were maybe 400 units of housing in downtown Austin. Now there are 6,000 units of housing in downtown Austin. It caught on. But this was, and in fact, the developer on this project, we did the whole design. We were ready to start with it, and the developer got cold feet and put it on hold for a year because there just was no assurance there was a market out there for this. 82 units. We didn't have any particular market segment we were shooting for because there was no experience of what market would buy condominiums in downtown Austin. So we have everything from tiny little one-bedrooms to 3,600 square foot, 3-bedroom houses. Just trying to shoot all across the market and see what we could get. So it's a modest size building, 82 units, but experimenting with this notion of how could you make downtown living appealing to people who, we're a suburban city. People don't know how to live downtown. How do you make people move out of their big single family house and move into a much smaller, much more sustainable, much more compact kind of lifestyle in downtown? I'm kind of ashamed to say that we were designing this building, we were building it, I didn't even think about living there. I had a perfectly good house in one of those leafy neighborhoods close into town. But I was up there one day while it was under construction, and I thought, shit, I gotta live here. This is just too cool. So I live on the 11th floor and have lived there for 8 years. And this is an instance I can talk about exactly what happens in this building, because this is home. And this is a place I've watched and observed for 8 years now. This is my unit, which is not typical. We did the finish out a little odd at the end with the colored panels, but the configuration is not different. They're just big open spaces. Even the little one-bedrooms are, just as little definition as we possibly could get and just as raw materials as we could get. And the encouragement, you can leave it raw like this, or you can fix it up however you want. You can personalize it because it's not one thing. It's not so frozen that you can't touch it. It's about putting your mark on it, just exactly as I put my mark on my unit and expect everyone else to do the same. There are now 8 architects that live in the building, and believe me, there are 8 completely different architectural characters of those people's places. But that's true of pretty much everybody in the building. They've done a wonderful job of inhabiting it. It has 12-foot ceilings. It comes with just concrete floors and concrete ceilings. I put bamboo floors on the lower level, left them concrete on the upper level. But these very, very flexible units. I want to tell you about the life that happens in this building. So my immediate next door neighbors, a young couple when they moved in, just the two of them. She's an MD, he's a PhD in psychology. Affluent, career-driven, really cool people. They're moving downtown where it's cool and it's hip, and they're going to live the life. Well, in these 8 years, they had 2 kids. Dylan's 5 years old, Bella's 2 years old. I'm Dylan's godfather. We were neighbors. We got to know each other, and I love these people, and I dearly love their kid now. We were neighbors. We had a great relationship, and they love their unit. They actually, my unit has, the way they're sold, they have no doors except on the bathrooms and the closets. It's just one big space. So they had, even the first time around, they'd separated off the master bedroom. And then when they got 2 kids, they separated off, as we had drawn in the plans, the option for making this a bedroom or making that a bedroom, and they made it into a 3-bedroom unit. But a little tight for 4 people, and especially when they're plenty affluent. They got lots of choices. But as the family grew, they did not want to leave the building. They loved this building, and they didn't want to leave, so they're living a little cramped. Until a 3-bedroom, 3,500 square foot unit came available. And so over Christmas, they moved up to the 12th floor into this larger unit. They decided to keep owning their unit next to mine, and someone from the 1st floor moved out of a smaller unit and into their unit, staying in the building. You know, this just doesn't happen where people have the kind of loyalty to, they're not going to leave their building. People love living here. They love the sense of community, and that's not accidental. You know, the parking garage in this building is delightful because honestly, a lot of your interaction with your neighbor in an urban environment is in the freaking parking garage. And it's a cool place, that parking garage, and people stop and chat, and it isn't a dungeon. Another really key thing is the elevator and the elevator lobby. There's a spectacular view from the elevator lobby. And that makes people hang out and talk and feel friendly. And nobody's door is near the elevator so that you're not infringing on or disturbing anybody's unit when you're there. Design is such an incredible key for helping people have the life they want to live. And I think in this building, virtually every unit is full of somebody that just says, wow, this is the life I wanted to live. And there weren't many options for that, because the architecture didn't provide that. So public spaces, residential spaces. Another thing that seems terribly important to me is really building places. Places that have identity and character and that people feel some loyalty to. We had the opportunity, thanks to Roger, actually, who was on the jury for the competition for this project. But we were selected in one of the GSA Design Excellence competitions to do this courthouse in way, way remote Alpine, Texas, way, way out in West Texas. Very, very beautiful Trans-Pecos landscape here, those huge outcroppings of Texas Pecos sandstone. And we made a building that, as far as I'm concerned, it's just about Alpine. It's about this region. It's about this place. We reopened a quarry that had been closed for almost 100 years and re-quarried that Texas Pecos sandstone. And we used about 12,000 tons of it in the building. As a courthouse, it has to have blast resistance and a whole lot of high security kinds of things. So we used the stone along with other masonry to make these very, very heavy blast-resistant walls. The little wall in the front here is actually for ram resistance, so somebody can't run a truck into it with a bomb in it. But it just looks like this wonderful, thick, massive stone wall, but happens at the same time to do the security requirements of the building. It's all about the shade you need out in West Texas. It's all about the sort of roughness of the landscape. We actually had masons that had no idea how to lay stone. There were a bunch of Mexican workers that we trained for 3 days and taught 7 of them how to lay the stone in this dry stack pattern. And then we told them, you can't have anybody else lay stone on this building except these 7 guys. So that worked just fine. Then it got to be Christmas holidays, and 2 of them didn't come back. And they replaced them with other masons who they assured me they were training perfectly well. But I can still tell you exactly where those 2 masons did their work, and it's vastly inferior. But it was all about craft and a kind of building that just belonged in this place. I'm a member of this, what's called the Philosophical Society. It's 100 Texans who are get together once a year for sort of intellectual discussions. One of the other 100 is a woman who's a very, very successful lawyer in West Texas. She's famous as this West Texas law lady. And she argues cases in this court all the time. When I first met her as part of the Philosophical Society, she immediately said, "You're the architect of my courthouse." And I said, "Damn right, yes, I am." And she said, "I want to tell you how that transformed the way we practice law in West Texas. Our law is all about immigration, and it's all about drugs. And these are nasty cases. And we were doing it in these awful buildings, and everybody was absolutely miserable. These are tense, difficult cases. We moved into that courthouse, and suddenly there was a kind of dignity, there was a kind of respect that came over everybody, because for one thing, they had a confidence in the federal government as an adjudicator in these difficult situations, because the building seemed to have its shit together. It seemed like it exuded a kind of confidence. She said, "This building transformed the way we do law in West Texas, and I always want to argue cases in that building." And to this day, every time I see her, she's got to take me over to whoever's there and say, "This guy did our courthouse. This guy did our courthouse." And I think that's who we are as architects. We're the people who do their courthouse. And it's got a kind of warmth and yet monumentality to it that depicts appropriately what the court should be in that community. I just had to put in here the building that we're just finishing here in Albuquerque, and it fits in the sense that this is absolutely a workhorse building. This is another one of those GSA buildings in the Design Excellence Program, and this one is one that is actually a developer is building it, and what goes in this building is miserable stuff. This is where the cops go out and they collect all the illegal immigrants and they bring them here and they store them here and they process them here, and the whole place is about angst, and it's a terrible experience what happens here, both for the people who are the police and who are policing the immigrants, and for the immigrants themselves. It's a tough thing that happens here. And also this building had to be super blast resistant and be able to withstand any kind of terrorist attack, because it's drug trade and then we got the cartels, and this was something that it really could happen, and it needed to protect itself. So we have limitations in the size of windows and many limitations to what this building could be. But in the center of this building is a courtyard. So the whole thing is wrapped around this courtyard. And on the courtyard, we don't have to worry about blast because it's protected. And so we can have lots of light and lots of openness. And we can give a kind of sense of peace and calm and serenity in that space that's just takes a little of the tension out of the air. We can let in lots of generous natural light here that we couldn't do on the periphery of the building. It's little gestures like that frankly are incredibly satisfying to me as what you should do as an architect. Just making these workers feel a little better about their job every day, making these immigrants perhaps have a little less stressful, a little less traumatic experience as they're going through a really difficult moment in their life. And that really leads to maybe the sine qua non of what I think I want to do as an architect. This is actually a hospital, a medical facility for the Chickasaw Indians in rural Oklahoma. And the reason why this one seems so important to me is here is a very disadvantaged culture, people who have been kicked in the teeth over and over and over again. They're also vulnerable. They have terrible problems with diabetes, terrible problems with alcoholism. They have many endemic health problems. And this is a tender moment in their life. They're very reluctant to get health care. It's scary to them. It's a culture they don't understand. And so we got the opportunity to design this medical facility. It's for the whole Chickasaw Nation. It's on a beautiful 240-acre site in the middle of nowhere, just on Chickasaw land. But if you're Chickasaw from anywhere in the whole United States, you can go here and you have free health care. They have universal health care like the rest of us in the U.S. actually don't have. And their idea, this is their president, President Anatubby, president of the Chickasaw Nation, and he is so committed to his people and to better health care for his people. And this was a personal thing where we were working for him to see if we could make a nurturing, really positive healthcare environment for people in the Chickasaw Nation. So the building is all about taking advantage of this beautiful site. There's really no backside to the building. Everywhere you're looking out to long views across the landscape, across meadows, to a creek, to a bosque of trees. This is actually the patient wing right here. And the windows in that had to do with both thinking of the patient inside and thinking of a person in a hospital room as a horizontal person. So instead of looking out a window like this, you're flat on your back and your view is more up and out. So the windows, all the rooms have high windows. Sometimes they have eye-level window and a high window, and sometimes they have one window that's tall all the way up. So really thinking about the experience of the people in the bed. And these are definitely rural people who it feels like you're in prison if you're too interior. They want to be able to see out. And then we flipped those and changed the windows back and forth to make a pattern that they immediately identify as their weaving pattern, a pattern in their culture that has to do with a way of weaving, both basket weaving and fabric weaving into cloth. So it touches a kind of cultural lodestone for them that has to do with who they are as a people. We're using, again, a local stone, beautiful Oklahoma stone, actually 4 different kinds that we put together in a blend, but gives that a feeling that's, I think, right for them, a little rugged and tawny, but at the same time, really sophisticated and beautiful. This is the biggest public building they have as a nation, and so there's a kind of center to the whole thing where all the food service is off to one side and the meeting and greeting, and their little counselors for different medical problems that are out in here. And it's a kind of community center that's in the center of the whole complex. And it's a grand and glorious place, a place you can walk in and say, I'm proud to be a Chickasaw. This is what our culture is about. That building's been open for about a year, and the chief of medicine, Judy Parker, is just amazing. She was not involved in any of the design process, but she took over when they moved in the new building. And this is a woman who definitely loves her building. And she's given NPR interviews. She's spoken at lots of conferences about the difference that a building can make in healthcare. One of the stories she likes to tell is that when they were in her previous building where she was an administrator, she did everything by email. She communicated with her doctors, her nurses, her staff. She did everything by email. And she thought, I'm super efficient doing this. But the truth was, she really didn't get to know her staff that well, just remotely, electronically. She said, when I moved into this building, one of the things we were very conscious of was passageways, because hospitals are all about moving from one place to another place, moving people, moving equipment. So we really all about passageways. And most of them have natural light, and they're beautiful, very, very gracious passageways. She said, when I moved in the building, I don't know, I just naturally thought, well, I'll just get up and walk to their office and give them this message. Or I'll just walk down to surgery and talk to the doctors down there. I'll just go to the emergency room and, deliver this message I could write by email. And she just, without even thinking, was walking through the building much more. And she said 2 things happened as a result of that. Number 1, I was the new guy on the block, but I got to know my staff really well, really quickly, like I actually never knew my old staff at my old hospital. The building made me interact with my staff. And she said the other thing was I lost 10 pounds in the first 2 months because I was walking instead of sitting on my fat butt in my office. This is a woman who understands the impact what we do has on her practice. She said, we sat together in a conference one time talking about the building, and she said, look, if you architects don't understand that you are medical practitioners, you don't get it, the impact what you do has on what we do. You are impacting the way medicine happens. And as such, you're medical practitioners. You know, I think we don't talk about enough the profound influence we have on everyday life. And it's a privilege to be able to interact with people, understand their needs and their desires, understand their place and their culture, and try to make an architecture that makes their life better. And for me, that's what it's all about. Thanks a lot.